Come on. This happens all the time when you see things moving in the direction they suddenly, because there is a divine hand directing the counterplan. That God is going to have a different outcome than what it looks like, and so things suddenly turn. And if you don't recognize that feature that God sometimes will turn things in history, you'll never understand history.
It's been over 3 minutes since I've interrupted David Barton, but I don't want you to get the impression that he's been telling the truth this whole time. The fact is, he's simply been lamenting the fact that we teach history factually, with dates and actually what happened, and we don't teach the providential view, as he calls it. He can make it sound as though the truth is boring, but what he really wants is to teach myths and legends instead of reality. He wants history taught where God is on our side. It's bad enough that he teaches his Christian dominionist lies to this audience, but the entire point of this whole speech is he wants our public schools to teach these lies as though they're fact.
Now that's the definition of history. History is the story of what God's been up to in the lives of individuals and peoples and nations, and it's really looking at what he's been doing. You get the same thing from atheists who file lawsuits if you try to teach God in the classroom or even repeat history, and you try to teach documents. The cases we've seen out in California where a teacher actually posts documents, but because they have the word God in them, he gets a lawsuit filed against him. He can't teach history if it mentions the word God.
The best I can tell from Barton's description, he is referring to California teacher Brad Johnson. This is a math, not history, teacher who is told by his principal to remove large religious banners from his classroom. There was no atheist suing anybody. It was Johnson, the teacher, who sued the school district. He lost his suit, of course. He was claiming it was his free speech and his classroom. But he was told he cannot use the public school to promote his religion. The stories I've read on this did not mention historical documents, and this is not a history class.
You may be aware that the most dangerous place in the United States today for any Christian youth particularly is university, college or university. And that's why, depending on which study you look at today, somewhere between 71 and 88% of Christian youth will deny their faith while at college. So we're losing 71 to 88% of Christian kids who go to four-year college. Kids raised in Christian homes, 71 to 88% will deny their faith. There's a lot of hostility out there.
It's not hostility, it's knowledge.
But you know what's amazing? Now, in recent years, in the last 15 to 20 years, we now know that over half of the kids at Christian schools, Christian colleges and universities will renounce their faith as well. Now, how does that happen?
Education. It works, bitches.
By the way, that's why today, if you do something like try to put God in history, you're going to get nailed. A book that we did, Jefferson Lies, made all sorts of national news because all these professors came, oh, no, Jefferson didn't believe in God. He wasn't religious. He's a great atheist. I mean, they went bonkers when we went back through and showed all the things to Jefferson.
Jefferson was a deist, not an atheist. And that book was withdrawn by the Christian publishing house because of all the falsehoods.
I've been appointed in a lot of states by state boards of education to write history and government standards for the students in those states. Now, I'm a cowboy. I live out in the country.
Well, I suppose if owning some books makes you a historian, then owning a pickup truck makes you a cowboy.
We live on a ranch. We've got all sorts of varmints we try to take care of on a regular basis. The top 2 rabies-carrying animals in the world live on our ranch. We've got 4 poisonous snakes in America, and they all live on our ranch. I mean, we got lots of varmints that we have to be careful of.
There's one. There's another.
7 judges in Iowa can look at the Iowa Constitution and say, you know what, we think the Iowa Constitution protects gay marriage and we're going to have it in Iowa. Now, you got to, and this is what they wrote. They said, you have to understand that we have now discovered rights that were hitherto unknown in our Constitution. If they weren't in there, how did you discover them?
That statement is not in the Iowa Supreme Court ruling.
We see this in politics all the time. And because we have to know the group to which you belong, we have to make laws based on the group to which you belong.
Notice all of these identity groups are liberal causes because, conservatives don't have special interest groups.
Now, God taxes people as well. It's called a tithe, but he taxes everybody the same, 10% across the board, rich or poor. Now, granted, if you make $100 million a year, your tithe is going to be $10 million. If you only make $100 a year, your tithe is going to be $10. The rich will pay more than the poor, but everybody's treated exactly the same.
Yep, the flat tax is biblical. It's just not good. The problem is that Barton does not believe we should improve on the ideas of ancient barbarians.
And so what we've done is taken the Latin phrase on the Great Seal that says e pluribus unum, which means out of many we become one, and we've exactly reversed it to where that we say, well, it's e unum pluribus. Out of one we become many.
With a straight face, he's claiming that leftists have destroyed the concept of e pluribus unum. Yet it was exactly his religious types who replaced this concept with "In God We Trust" as our national motto. It is exactly the religious people like Barton who have created division by trying to force their religion onto us.
When we were doing the history standards in Texas, and I was one of the 6 expert reviewers appointed by the state board to do that, Texas is a conservative state, and yet look what we had to deal with. The student understands the contributions of people of various racial, ethnic, and religious groups to the United States. Does that mean that if you're not one of those groups, you didn't make any contributions to the United States? You only made contributions if you belonged to some group?
So is there someone who is not a member of a racial or ethnic or religious group?
No. Methodist Church has changed a whole lot in 200 years. Matter of fact, they've changed so much, I bet you 99.9% of Methodist churches today would not let George Whitefield come into their pulpit, and he's one of their founders.
Because he was a slave owner, and he was the principal advocate for reintroducing slavery to the colony of Georgia.
United States, you only made contributions if you belonged to some group?
I don't know how Mr. Barton can remember the good old days as differently as I do. He and I are part of the same group. We were born and raised within 25, 30 miles from each other, about 2 years apart. And here is what I know. This is where David Barton grew up. And I started second grade right here in 1959. In that year, there were race riots over here, because up till that time, the black kids in Mansfield had to go to school over here. That's nearly 20 miles. Back then, before the freeways, about a 30-mile trip. And that's before you start picking up and dropping off different kids. It could be as much as an hour trip to get to school. But in that year, they were going to their local school for the first time with white kids, and that's why there were race riots. Whatever David Barton may say, people at that time were very much aware of what group they were in.
Interestingly, it emphasizes groups and group rights rather than individual rights, and it divides rather than unites. Now, if this is one of the traps, what's the solution for avoiding the trap? That's pretty simple. The Bible always gives a solution for how to get out of trouble. We see a trap, what's the way to avoid it?
Somehow in Barton's world, if we bring Jesus into the schools, we will be uniting everybody. He really does not comprehend that this might be divisive.